At the family dinner, my father slammed his fist on the table, his face inches from mine, screaming, "You and your kid are just freeloaders." My mother didn't defend me. She smiled as if she agreed. The air was thick with silence except for their words echoing in my head. They forgot one thing. They were saying it inside my house. I looked at them steady and said the only words that could cut through the noise. "You have 48 hours to leave. I'm Ethan, and this is the story of how the people who should have loved me most turned me into an outsider in my own family. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. If my story moves you, please subscribe to the channel. Every voice, every listener makes me feel less alone in what I've been through. And maybe, just maybe, sharing this will help someone else find the courage to stand up for themselves too. Before the night my father called me a freeloader inside my own house, there was a quieter evening that set everything in motion. Bend, Oregon was rinsed in late light. The Cascade Range combed into soft blue ribs beyond our windows. Caleb and I had just come off the Deschutes River Trail, our shoes dusty with mica. He sprawled at the kitchen island with a magnifying glass labeling a beetle wing for his science project. I chopped mint from our little herb bed and brewed tea. This was the life I built on purpose. A modest, modern cabin on the edge of town timber and glass and honest air. A calendar anchored by school pickup and weekend hikes. A job that lets me go home with my conscience intact. I manage product at a small environmental tech company based here in Bend, Oregon. We build software that helps towns monitor water quality and track the health of their rivers in real time. It pays the bills. More than that, it gives me a reason to look at a map and feel useful. On Fridays, we swing by the Bend Farmers Market for peaches and bread, while buskers play banjo near the old mill district. On Sundays, Caleb and I take inventory of the creatures in our yard, his notebook a patchwork of taped leaves and hand-drawn tracks. He keeps a page marked with an eagle. He sketched from a book, wings wide, eye bright. Freedom, he wrote over it in pencil. I didn't tell him how much that word rattles around inside me. The phone lit up while the kettle sang. Mom on the screen. The room felt smaller before I even answered. Her voice came in thin and dramatic, like the stage had already been set. "Your father's heart, a procedure the house." She said the bank had sent a new notice. She said Derek had been pushing his art forward, and that meant there had been some expenses. She said words like, "Family and duty and all we're asking is a bridge." The longer she spoke, the more the air pressed on my chest, and the more I watched Caleb's small, careful hands finish a label with perfect spelling. My mother's talent has always been arranging facts, the way she arranges picture frames, cropping out what she doesn't like. The call threaded the same needle I grew up under, plea and command sewn into one thread. When I said I needed to see the paperwork, she turned the temperature up. "Richard could die," she said, and then almost kindly, "You make good money. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent." I looked at the painting over our mantel. My grandfather's work, a Cascade Range ridgeline he painted from memory when I was a kid. The canvas is my weather vane. It never lies. I ended the call with a promise. I could stand behind. I would look at everything. I would not wire $1 until I had documents in my hands. I opened a video chat to Angela. She's my friend and the only person I let near my spreadsheets. She listened slow and steady, and when I stopped talking, she gave me the sentence she always gives me when I wobble. "Don't rescue adults. Protect the kid in your house first." Then she added, "Because she knows me. If they want help, they can give you the facts. You negotiate with paper, not tears." I texted Monica across the street. She teaches 3rd grade and shares her backyard tomatoes like a religion. If I have to be out, could you take Caleb after school? Monday. She sent a thumbs up and a "when have I ever said no?" I checked my calendar. I was supposed to be in Portland, Oregon early next week to visit our West Coast pilot site. I changed my return flight bend by Monday noon. No excuses. The point was not a gesture. The point was to see the truth with my own eyes. After Caleb brushed his teeth, we sat on the porch steps and watched a pair of swallows cut the last light. He leaned into me the way kids do when they forget to be careful. "Dad," he said, "do eagles stay with their families forever?" I told him some do and some don't, but the good ones find a way to keep flying. I didn't say that blood has never kept me safe. I didn't say that the mountain feels more like kin than the house I grew up in. Inside, the kettle cooled. I took the painting down for a second and traced the edge of the frame where the canvas meets wood. My grandfather's brushwork is honest and stubborn. It taught me to tell the difference between color and cover-up. When the house finally went quiet, I stacked a folder with our mortgage, my health insurance, Caleb's school list, and a blank legal pad. "If I pay them again," I said in the small court of my skull, "I teach my son that boundaries are negotiable. If I refuse, I risk being called a monster again." The choice slid around like a loose tile. Then I wrote the only plan that felt like a plan. I'll be there in person. I'll ask for every bill, every notice, every signature. I'll look my father in the face and ask what he really needs. And I'll decide with the same rule that built this life. Protect the kid in my house first. I tucked Caleb in and left his notebook open to the eagle. When I turned off the lamp, the mountain in my grandfather's painting looked back, dark and solid. It didn't pity me. It didn't applaud. It just was. I have always trusted things that just are. Packing a carry-on for a 3-day work swing should have taken 10 minutes. Instead, I stood there with a shirt in my hand staring at the painting like it had something new to say. It didn't. It said the same thing it always says. Remember what you learned the hard way. The memory cut in clean. I was 19 in the old house near the old mill district where our living room smelled like oil paint and coffee grounds. My father tuned his guitar in the corner, the string whining into perfect pitch. My mother hung frames in clusters, adjusting them a half inch at a time. I was proud of my acceptance letter to the University of Oregon. My grandfather had left me $140,000 with a note that was only 2 lines long for school for you. Nobody else had ever been that clear with me. The night they took me to see the gallery space, the windows were tall and the floors echoed. They described success like pulling a sheet off a finished sculpture. My father moved his hands in wide arcs. My mother used words like seed and family. "We'll double your tuition," she said, smiling like the future had already agreed. I told them I wanted to study computer science, that I was good at logic, and loved building things that worked whether someone understood them or not. My mother looked hurt in that way she knows punishes me. Art is the truest voice, my father said, not unkindly. It's our name in the world. I said no. I said I would help with weekends and what I could, but the inheritance was for school. My mother returned from the hall with my grandfather's painting and handed it to me like a blessing. "Keep this," she said, "a reminder that we're all in this together." That night, we ate takeout on the floor, and they unfolded a single-page form at closing time. "Mia release," they said, "so we can use your photo when you cut the ribbon." I signed it while my father tapped a soft rhythm on the guitar body and my mother kissed my hair. It felt stupidly adult. The gallery never made it past month 9. The sprinkle of tourists dried up after fall. Winter turned the old mill district into a wet, quiet stretch of concrete. Bills stacked like sediment. Nobody mentioned the tuition they'd promised. When I asked about repayment, my mother angled her head as if I had insulted the weather. By spring, I had moved into a tiny apartment with 2 classmates. I delivered newspapers before dawn, poured lattes in the old mill district until my wrists ached, and tutored freshmen in algebra for the one curriculum I could control the narrow miracle of a balanced equation. I tacked my acceptance letter above the desk like a talisman. The more tired I got, the less I believed in miracles. The ugly part came later. I went to apply for a student credit card and watched the woman behind the bank counter make the face that means something is wrong. My name had been attached to a small, ugly line of debt, a secondary guarantee for operating expenses signed the night of the so-called grand opening. The document had my scroll on it, but the header wasn't media release at all. I had been 19 for 8 days. They had waited like people wait for a storm to pass. My credit score sank under a weight I didn't know I was carrying. It took years to dig it out with on-time rent receipts and a folder thick enough to stop a door. That was the day I started keeping everything. Receipts, emails, screenshots, PDFs. If somebody asked me for help, I wrote down the how and when and what we agreed to. I learned that paper has a way of holding people to their best selves, or revealing their worst. I also learned that love, at least in my family, was often a poem written on the back of a bill. My father would still say that line art is the truest voice whenever I bristled at a new ask. Funny thing is, he was right. Art does tell the truth. The truth was in the way their frames always held the flattering light and never the cracked corner. The truth was in how easily a signature can be misnamed when you trust the person handing you the pen. Years later, walking past a brick wall sprayed with one-word freedom in cobalt letters, I understood him even better. The truest voice in that moment wasn't art. It was the way I walked past it without turning back. Now, with my mother's latest plea buzzing in my pocket, I laid the painting on the table and ran my finger along the edge where canvas meets wood, the seam where things can be hidden or held. I wrote Angela a text. "I'll ask for every document. No money until I see it all." She replied in seconds. Good paper, not tears. I printed a fresh checklist. Mortgage statements, medical invoices, notices from the bank, and slid it into the folder I would carry through their door like armor. I wanted to believe my father's heart needed help and not a performance. I wanted to believe the house could be saved by a plan instead of a son. I wanted to believe that if I showed up like an adult and asked adult questions, I would be met with the same. But belief is a luxury earned one proof at a time. I zipped the carry-on and turned off the lamp. In the dark glass, the mountain and my grandfather's painting held its line. I promised the boy asleep down the hall, and the boy I used to be the same thing. This time I walk in with my eyes open. This time I don't leave them any space to write my name where it doesn't belong. When I stepped off the plane back into Bend, Oregon, the air was damp and smelled faintly of pine and rain. The cab ride from the airport passed familiar blocks I had not walked in years. Murals I didn't recognize filled brick walls. New coffee shops spilled with students and tourists. But when we turned onto the old street where I grew up, time collapsed. The house sat the same way it always had. Peeling paint on the clappered yard, untended weeds pushing through the cracks of the front walk. I stopped on the curb for a long minute before going up the steps, bracing myself for the ghosts. Inside the living room, the reek of turpentine and dust. Canvases leaned against the walls. Derek's half-finished projects cluttered every corner. Bottles, unpaid bills. Even a coffee cup hardened with paint water covered the table. The smell of decay was mixed with stale ambition. I found my father in the recliner, pale, but not as fragile as my mother had made him sound. His breathing was steady, his eyes alert enough to watch me carefully. At the hospital later that afternoon, the cardiologist was direct. Yes, there was disease. Yes, a procedure would be needed. But there was no imminent collapse. The way my mother had painted it, I expected to walk into an emergency. Instead, I was greeted by a manageable condition stretched thin into a crisis for leverage. I asked for paperwork. My mother slid a stack of envelopes across the table, her hand trembling more from theatrics than age. I leafed through the late payment notices, interest charges climbing like vines, and receipts marked art project supplies. The balance with penalties and fees totaled close to $300,000. I recognized my brother's handwriting on some of the receipts. A $3,500 camera, a series of canvas shipments, and this rental of a studio that never opened. None of it carried a return. I didn't argue. I took the stack with me. That night I walked into the office of Daniel Cross, a real estate lawyer recommended by a former colleague. His office overlooked Drake Park, neat and quiet, a contrast to the chaos I had just left. He was blunt in a way I appreciated. If I gave them money directly, it would vanish into the same pit as before. If I wanted to help, I had to go through the bank, through contracts, through ownership. Buy the debt, own the property, he said. Otherwise, you're pouring water into sand. He told me if I held the deed, I could make the rules about who stayed and on what terms. The words lodged in my chest. Ownership meant control, and control meant finally stepping out of the shadow they had built for me. I called Angela later that night, pacing the rented apartment. She listened without interrupting, then repeated the rules she drilled into me. No cash, no handouts, paperwork, or nothing. I promised her and myself that I would not step back into the trap of emotions. If they wanted to pull me in, they'd have to do it on record. The next morning at the bank, I asked for the file. The clerk handed me a folder thick with statements, withdrawal slips, and forms. My stomach dropped when I found a document labeled Financial Support Letter. It bore my name in bold, with my income listed as the stabilizing factor. Attached was a cropped screenshot from my LinkedIn profile, a years-old email cut and pasted to look like I had pledged to back them. My supposed commitment. No wonder the bank treated me as the fallback. Someone had taken pieces of my life and stitched them into a lie convincing enough to borrow against. I pressed my thumb into the page, furious at the neat forgery. They had been betting with my name. When I left, I caught sight of a painting leaning against the staircase, one of my grandfather's. The frame was cracked, the backing paper split, something darker hidden behind it. I touched it briefly, then set it down again. I would come back for it when the dust settled. For now, I had what I needed. That evening, I typed a short message to my mother and brother. I'll deal with the bank. No cash. Everything goes through documents. My finger hovered over send before pressing it the first real shot across the line. The first time I said no, and meant it. And yet, as I lay in bed, I wondered how deep the forgery went and how many other pieces of my life they had borrowed without permission. More than that, I wondered how much of this mess might splash onto Caleb. I could fight for my own boundaries, but could I keep him untouched by the fallout? The question sat like a stone in my chest. They insisted on a family dinner, and I agreed because I needed them all in the same room. My grandfather's painting came with me propped carefully in the back of the car. I set it against the dining room wall, its quiet mountain watching as we gathered. The table was laid with fried chicken collard greens, cornbread, the comfort food of a South that had comforted me once. On the surface, it looked warm, but the air was already wired tight. My father began before we finished serving. His voice was hard but steady. The bank is ready to take the house unless you cover it. This is family business. You make the kind of money that can fix this. He looked at me like it was already settled. My mother leaned in her tone, softer but sharper. You've had every advantage. Isn't it time you gave something back? She said it like gratitude was a bill I had forgotten to pay. The front door opened late and Derek strolled in, hair unwashed, scarf draped like a stage prop. He kissed my mother's cheek, clapped my father's shoulder, and dropped into a chair as if he owned it. You don't understand sacrifice, Ethan, he said between bites. You've never risked anything for art for family. I reminded them I had Caleb, that my entire life revolved around raising him safely. I told them every dollar I made was accounted for his school, his future, the roof over our heads. My father's face flushed. He slammed his fist against the table, dishes rattling. You and that boy are freeloaders, he barked. All this time we carried you, and now you pretend you're above us. My mother's lips curved into a thin smile. She didn't contradict him. Derek laughed low, called me a hypocrite. The words hit like heat, but I held myself still. I looked from one face to another, waiting for anyone to stand with me. No one did. Then Derek leaned back, smirking. "I used your name for the sponsorship contract," he said, as if it were nothing. "Mom told me it was fine. You'd cover it. You always do." I turned to my father, searching for denial. His eyes didn't waver. "Family sacrifices for each other," he said flatly. "Not apology, not defense, just creed." The admission landed harder than the insult. Silence pressed down, broken only by the ticking clock. Out the window, I caught a glimpse of the neighbor across the street. Curtain lifted slightly. People were watching. Maybe they always had. On the table lay another envelope I hadn't opened yet. More bank reports they had placed like bait. I left it untouched. I stood the chair, scraping back. My heart was pounding, but my voice was calm, colder than I expected it could be. "You have 48 hours to leave." The words filled the room sharp as a verdict. My father froze. My mother's smile vanished. Derek stared as though the script had been torn in front of him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply gathered my coat, lifted my grandfather's painting from the wall, and walked out. The door shut behind me like a gavel. On the street, the night air burned clean in my lungs. Inside, they would be scrambling, accusing, consoling each other with the same lies. But for the first time, the line was drawn in ink, not pencil. The only question left was whether I could keep it from smudging, or whether the fight I had just started would pull Caleb and me back into the ruin I swore we had left behind. The storm didn't break inside the house. It broke online. By mid-morning, my phone lit up with messages, co-workers, forwarding me links, acquaintances tagging my name. Susan had recorded herself in a downtown cafe, her hair brushed neat eyes, wet voice trembling for the camera. She told the world her son had abandoned his aging parents, that I refused to pay for my father's life-saving procedure, that I was letting the family home fall to the bank. Behind her, baristas moved cups and customers scrolled their phones, but all anyone heard was her performance. Within hours, thousands had watched. The comments piled in heartless, ungrateful, selfish. People I didn't know carried torches with her name on their lips. I shut the laptop so hard it rattled. My chest burned. Not for myself, but for Caleb. I pictured him stumbling on the video, classmates repeating words they didn't understand, but would cut him just the same. Rage pressed up in me, but I forced it back. Angela's voice came like an anchor. "Don't fight in their theater," she said. "Pull them onto your stage paper law fact." She sat across from me in her apartment, her phone dark, her gaze steady. "If you flinch into defending yourself emotionally, they've already won." I walked with her to Daniel Cross's office that afternoon. He spread the loan documents across his desk, each page a battlefield. "Here's the clause," he said, tapping his finger on a line I hadn't noticed. "You can purchase the mortgage outright. If you do, you own the property. Then you, not your parents, not your brother, decide who stays." The option hit like cold water. Buying it meant putting myself deeper into debt, but it also meant control protection and an end to the cycle. I thought of Caleb asleep in his bed, his eagle sketch still taped into his notebook. I picked up the pen and signed. $300, $1,000. Ownership transferred. The house was mine. Later that night, combing through the pile of old documents I'd taken, I found something that stopped me cold. A utilities contract for electric service signed with my name in careful script, only it wasn't mine. The letters curved wrong, too neat, like someone copying from memory. They had been forging me for years, sliding my signature across forms to make their lives easier, their debts payable by a name I worked to keep clean. My chest tightened as I held the paper. It wasn't a one-time slip. It was a habit, a pattern. At the bank, the manager confirmed what I already feared. The loan officer had approved their extension because of a support letter on file. "We assumed you were backing them," she said. "It had your name, your salary range, even an email. I asked to see it." The letter was a Frankenstein piece of my LinkedIn profile, cropped and pasted with a sentence twisted from an old message. It looked official enough to justify hundreds of thousands of dollars. They hadn't just borrowed my money. They had stolen my credibility, my future. I sat in the quiet of Angela's apartment afterward, the hum of the fridge the only sound. She poured me coffee and reminded me of what I already knew. "You own the house now. They live there on your terms. The lies don't change that." I nodded, though the anger still throbbed like a wound. I glanced at the cracked frame I'd leaned against the wall in her living room. My grandfather's painting I had rescued again. The backing paper was split at the corner, a glimpse of something tucked inside. Not yet, I thought. Not tonight. As I drove home, the city lights smeared across the windshield. Susan's video still spun online sympathy pouring toward her like rain. But facts were gathering in my hands, heavy and sharp. They could call me ungrateful, but soon the records would speak louder than any tears. Still, a question needed when the truth came out. Would anyone care to listen, or would the crowd already have chosen their villain? When I returned to the old house, a legal notice was taped to the front door. My name printed bold at the top, declaring me the rightful owner. The paper curled in the breeze. I pushed inside the air-stale canvases, leaning like corpses. My father rose from the chair, anger tightening his jaw. "You might have papers," he growled, "but this is still my house." He pounded his fist against the wall as if force could change ink. My mother stood behind him, lips pinched, eyes darting to see if I would flinch. Derek appeared with a grin, a stack of folders in his hand. "I've got proof you agreed," he said, waving a document. He slid it across the table like a winning card. "Art sponsorship contract, your name right here." I didn't bother arguing. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, and sent it to Daniel Cross with 2 words forged again. Derek's smirk faltered. My mother's hands twisted the hem of her sweater. My father sat back down, heavily muttering that family sacrifices were never supposed to be this cold. I walked upstairs past peeling wallpaper to the corner where my grandfather's old painting leaned. The frame was cracked deeper now. The backing paper fled open. I pulled it away and found folded sheets hidden inside. My breath caught. My grandfather's handwriting neat and stubborn. A codicil to his will. It said, plainly, that if the family ever misused his estate authority, passed to me, he had seen this coming. He had prepared for it. My fingers shook as I read it again, the ink pressing weight into my chest. When I confronted them with the paper, Derek's face went white, then red. He tried to laugh it off, but his eyes darted to my mother. "He'll never prove it holds," he muttered. My mother's shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked older than her years. I knew about the letter, she whispered almost to herself. "I just didn't think you'd hold on to everything." I stared at her, the admission colder than her denial. She had watched me struggle for years and still let me carry their debts. On the porch later, I overheard neighbors talking as they walked past. "That family's a mess," one said. "Always fighting, always noise. I'm glad someone's putting a stop to it." Their voices faded, but the meaning stayed. The image my parents had worked so hard to project bohemian artists' free spirits had already crumbled in the eyes of the community. What was left was just noise and paper. I carried the codicil back inside, folded tight in my pocket. In the empty living room, I stood alone with the smell of dust and paint, the silence heavy. I looked at the pages again, then at the cracked frame, at the ruin of a house that once held my childhood. The line in me hardened. This was no longer about shame or guilt. It was about ending a cycle that had stolen enough years already. I whispered to the air, to my grandfather's paint still clinging to the canvas. "It ends now." For the first time in a long time, I felt the words settle as truth, not hope. The masks had fallen. What came next would not be easy, but the fight was no longer about proving myself. It was about enforcing the truth that had always been waiting hidden under layers of paper and lies. By dawn, the house was already holding its breath. Gray light slid through the tired curtains, touching the stacks of canvases like frost. Daniel Cross stood beside me on the front step with a folder under his arm. Two uniformed officers waited a few feet back, faces neutral, eyes awake. I unlocked the door and felt the latch give the way. Old latches do soft and stubborn at once. They were ready for a fight. My father was in the doorway to the dining room as if he'd slept there, jaw-set bathrobe tied like a belt in a ring. My mother hovered behind him, smoothing the same sleeve again and again. Derek came down the stairs, still buttoning his shirt, daring me to look away first. I didn't. "This is theft," my father said. "You're taking what isn't yours." "It is mine," I said, calm as I could manage. "By purchase, by record, by the terms you signed when you borrowed what you couldn't pay back." I put the folder on the table and opened it. "Today is the last day of the notice. We're doing this by the book." He laughed, short and bitter. "You can't evict your own parents. You can when the house is at stake and the lies won't stop," I said. I slid the codicil across the wood, a clean copy and the photographs of the original. Granddad anticipated misuse. He gave authority to me if you abused the estate. His words, not mine. I read the line out loud, steady as if reciting case law. My mother flinched like the paper had teeth. Derek reached for a different stack and flicked a page onto the table. "And here's your agreement to fund the work," he said. "We all made commitments." The officers watched me, hands quiet near their belts. Daniel Cross held up his phone and said without raising his voice, "We have the originals and the metadata. The document he's showing is not what it pretends to be." Derek grabbed at the page again, tore it in half, then in quarters, as if shredding the counterfeit now could rewrite the past. Daniel Cross didn't blink. "I've already filed copies with the court," he said. My father pointed a shaking finger at me. "You owe us. Blood makes a debt you don't get to walk away from." I took a breath that tasted like old varnish and smoke. "What I owe is to my son," I said. "What I owe is to the life I built so he doesn't grow up with paper knives in his back." I laid down the utilities contract with the careful counterfeit of my signature. Then the so-called support letter, the LinkedIn screenshot pasted into a promise I never made. "This is a pattern," I said. "Not an accident, not one bad decision. A pattern." My mother's eyes shone the way they do when a camera's red light is on. "We didn't know it would go this far," she whispered. "It always goes this far when nobody tells it to stop," I said. From my bag, I pulled my grandfather's painting, no longer a secret, the backing paper removed and the original Cautil photographed clean. Taped behind the stretcher bar had been a small envelope with my name. I kept the envelope in my pocket for this moment. I opened it and read the short letter aloud. He had written in a steady hand that family must be chosen by truth, not by blood alone. He had written that if the house ever became a weapon, I was to lay it down and start again. The room went still in a way I had never felt in that house. There are silences that are vacant and silences that are full. This one was full. Daniel Cross stepped forward. As of 8:30 a.m., the lease with the new tenants takes effect the moment the property is vacant. He said, "They're a young couple who teach at the Bend Arts Center. They'll treat the place with care." My mother's mouth opened, closed, opened again. My father's face broke into amazement, then fury, as if someone had rotated the sun without asking him. Derek swore under his breath and kicked a box of frames. Glass clinked against glass. Voices gathered outside the way voices do when a house has been a performance for years. Curtains shifted across the street. A man I remembered from childhood stood on the sidewalk with his dog and didn't pretend not to listen. My father launched into a speech how we had always been the creative soul of the block, how I was punishing him for age and illness. But the words fell heavy. People who had watched the shouting matches on hot nights and the broken bottles on colder ones weren't moved now that the story had a different narrator. The officers explained the logistics, what could be taken, what had to remain until a later pickup, how long the driveway could be blocked. Daniel Cross and I walked the rooms, noting the damage that would need repair. My mother followed close, narrating the house as if that could keep it. "We hosted Thanksgiving here," she said in a voice meant for strangers. "That window faces the first snowfall every year." I stopped and looked at her. "You can keep the memories," I said. "You just can't keep the deed." By noon, the living room was a maze of boxes and resentment. My father muttered about ungrateful sons. My mother wept without tears. Derek tried once more to hand me an envelope labeled with my name. I didn't take it. At the door, my mother turned an actress searching for the last line. "You'll regret this," she said. I thought of Caleb laughing in the backyard of our cabin, of the eagle he'd drawn, of the way he sleeps with his face relaxed when he knows the roof above him will stay. "I already regret what I let go on for this long," I said. They stepped over the threshold one by one, each carrying the version of the story that kept them upright. Neighbors parted to let them pass. A woman I didn't know nodded at me as if to say it was time. When the last box was gone, I closed the door with my palm pressed flat against the wood. The house exhaled. I stood alone in the stale light with the painting under my arm and my grandfather's letter in my pocket, and felt something loosen that had been tight in me since I was 19. On the walk to the car, I didn't look back. The line between past and present had always been faint in this family. That morning I carved it deep enough to see. A week later, Bend, Oregon exhaled. Caleb and I carried his recycled metal eagle into the Community Arts Festival. Sun caught the cut feathers. Strangers paused. He said, "We made it," and didn't let go of my sleeve. Angela bumped my shoulder. Monica waved with a flyer for a Tumalo Creek walk. Their presence felt like a frame holding the picture steady. Word drifted back. My mother selling greens at the Bend Farmers Market. My father balancing books for small shops. Derek between projects. No calls, no videos. At the cabin, we rehung my grandfather's Cascade Range ridgeline. I repaired the frame but left the small tear where the truth got in. Beneath it, I mounted his letter so Caleb can read it when he's ready. In the yard, we pressed new roots. Sage basil, rosemary water darkening the soil until the air smelled green. Cleaning my desk, I found his old memo naming me Stuart if the family faltered. Instead of anger, I felt seen. Dusk pulled. Fireflies stitched the lawn. "Is this our forever house?" Caleb asked. "Yes," I said.